The Terran War was over, and humanity had lost. Their fleets were broken across the stars, their colonies burned, and their proud banners reduced to ashes drifting in cold space. No one expected them to rise again. The galaxy laughed at them, calling them weak, calling them finished. Yet deep in the shadow of a forgotten battlefield, a single ship floated between the wreckage. Its engines were dead, its crew tired, and its future uncertain. The survivors inside were all that remained of a once powerful Terran patrol. They had no command, no backup, and no safe place to run. But what they had was a will that refused to die. The crew looked out at the view beyond their cracked windows. The sight was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Hundreds of broken ships drifted like skeletons across the void. Some were human, their hulls torn and blackened. Others were alien, twisted into strange shapes with glowing metal veins. The battlefield was silent now, but silence carried its own weight. It was a silence of death, of ships that would never sail again. Yet within this graveyard was something more. There was steel, there was power, there was the possibility of life if someone was brave enough to take it. Captain Arlen, the last officer among them, stood at the command chair that no longer had command code to give. He looked at his crew, a mix of engineers, gunners, and pilots who had nothing left but each other. Their faces were hollow with hunger and exhaustion. They whispered questions he did not want to answer. Where will we go, Captain? Do we hide? Do we surrender? Arlen had no map, no orders, but he had something else. His eyes burned with defiance. He told them no more running. If they stayed broken, they would die. But if they fought, maybe they could live long enough to matter. The idea was born there among the ruins. Not to escape, not to hide, but to build. The scrapyard around them was not only a graveyard. It was a mountain of raw pieces waiting for hands to shape it. What if they could take the bones of fallen ships and create something new? What if, with nothing but rust and broken wires, they could build a warship strong enough to fight back? The crew stared at him as if he had gone mad, but madness was better than despair. Slowly, a spark lit in their tired hearts. They began with small steps. Engines torn from alien wrecks were dragged back through the void. Plates of armor were cut free and hauled into the docking bay. Old cannons, still half working, were tested and stripped for parts. The crew worked with torches and welders, their hands blistered, their bodies weak from lack of food. Each spark of fire from a welding torch was a reminder that they were not finished. They cursed, they bled, and they kept going. Piece by piece, they laid the foundations of something bigger than survival. They were building hope. But not all was quiet in the graveyard. Strange signals flickered across their failing sensors. At first they thought it was static, a ghost echo of old battles. Then the signals grew stronger. Faint, distant pulses moving through the wrecks as if someone or something else was watching them. The crew grew uneasy. They asked the captain if it was the enemy. He did not answer. He only told them to keep working, to stay sharp, to be ready. Fear was in the air, mixing with the heat of the welding torches and the sound of heavy steel being dragged into place. Nearer, the youngest engineer, was the first to swear she saw movement outside. Through the cracked viewing glass she whispered that something shifted in the dark. A shadow among shadows. At first no one believed her, but then more of them began to feel it too. The scrapyard was not empty. Something moved out there, silent, patient, watching. The wrecks groaned as if touched by unseen hands. Strange lights flickered between shattered hulls. It was as if the graveyard itself had eyes. The crew tightened their grips on whatever tools or weapons they had left. Every clang of metal they made now felt too loud, every torch flamed too bright. If there was something in the dark, it already knew they were here. Yet even with fear growing like ice in their veins, they kept working. They could not stop now. They would not stop. Humanity had already been broken once. To fall silent here would mean their end. So they forced their shaking hand to move, welding steel onto steel, fusing alien engines to Terran armor. They worked not only against time, but against the shadows gathering around them. Captain Arlen stood at the broken command deck and looked out at the battlefield. His eyes narrowed. He could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down, daring them to give up. But humans were not made to bow forever. They were made to rise, even when all strength was gone. His crew would not surrender to the silence of this graveyard. They would turn it into something else. Something alive. Something powerful. Something the enemy would never expect. In that cold and endless sea of death, the decision was made. They would not escape. They would not hide. They would forge the scrapyard into a weapon so terrible that the galaxy would no longer laugh at them. And as the ghost signals drew closer, as shadows crept between the wrecks, the crew of the broken Terran ship prepared themselves. The Dreadnought was only a dream in their minds, but it was a dream sharp enough to cut through fear. Their hands were weak, their supplies few, and their enemies many. But their spirit was iron. The graveyard would not be their tomb. It would be their forge. The scrapyard was silent except for the sounds of men and women working with fire and steel. Sparks lit the dark like falling stars as a Terran crew cut apart broken hulls and dragged them back to their ship. Every piece mattered, no matter how small. Bent beams were straightened, shattered armor plates were welded together, and alien machines were carefully pulled from the wrecks. Their ship had no name now, no power to fly, but inside its shadowed hull a new heart was starting to beat. It was a fragile hope, but it was more than they had yesterday. The crew worked in shifts, though few could truly rest. Hunger gnawed at them, sleep was broken, and the air recyclers coughed dust. Still, their hands did not stop. They were like miners digging for air, like prisoners clawing toward light. Their fear of the shadows moving outside pushed them harder. If something was watching, then time was short. They needed defenses, weapons, and engines that could roar to life before the darkness closed in. Each bolt tightened. Each spark of the torch, each heavy clang of steel was another answer to death itself. Neera sat cross-legged on the floor, her face smudged with black grease, staring at the strange glowing crystal core she had salvaged from an alien wreck. The others avoided it, afraid it might explode or poison the air, but she was curious. She ran her fingers along the grooves etched into its sides, trying to understand the rhythm of its pulses. Human tech was simple compared to this. Wires, circuits, reactors, they all made sense. But this alien core pulsed like a heartbeat, alive, humming in her palms. She whispered that maybe it could power their ship, but the others shook their heads. No Terran system would accept such a thing. Arlen, however, told her to keep trying. He believed that strange answers were better than no answers at all. Days bled into nights, though space knew no sunrise. The crew lost track of time. Their bodies ached, their stomachs cramped, but they kept moving. One by one, the skeleton of a greater vessel began to take shape inside the dock. Alien plating patched the holes of their Terran hull. Human engines were reinforced with jagged parts from ships that had never belonged in this galaxy. The Dreadnought was not yet real, but its bones were being laid. It was ugly, rough, and mismatched. Still, when the crew looked at it, they felt something powerful, like watching a monster rise from the ashes. Arguments grew louder as the pressure rose. Some crew members whispered they should not waste their strength building something so impossible. A small escape ship, they argued, would give them a chance to slip away quietly. They could leave the war behind and find some lonely rock to live out the rest of their days. But Arlen refused. He told them survival without purpose was only waiting for death. Humanity's enemies would find them no matter how far they ran. The only choice was to fight, to stand again, to forge a weapon that no one believed possible. His words lit fire in some hearts, but planted doubt in others. Still, no one stopped working. Even in doubt, their hands kept welding. It was on the seventh day that their senses flared with warning. A faint signal cut through the silence of the scrapyard. At first, they thought it was another ghost echo, a fragment of old battles. But this was different. It pulsed with order, sharp and deliberate, like a searchlight moving through the dark. The crew froze when they saw it. An enemy scout ship was in the sector. If it found them, there would be no mercy. Terran survivors were hunted like animals. The scout would report their location, and a fleet would arrive to burn them from existence. Panic whispered through the ship like cold wind. Arlen ordered silence. Engines were dead, so they had no power signature to give them away. But the scrap they had been cutting glowed hot, and the welding sparks had been visible in the void. If the scout was close, it may already know. He told the crew to keep their torches dark and their comms silent. For hours, they sat in choking stillness, every breath feeling too loud, every creak of metal like thunder. Outside, through the cracked glass, faint lights blinked in the distance. The enemy scout was moving among the wrecks, searching, patient. The graveyard that had sheltered them now felt like a cage. Nera clutched the alien core to her chest as if it could protect her. She whispered that maybe they could use it now. Maybe it could power their ship just long enough to escape. The chief engineer shook his head. It was not ready. If they connected it wrong, the whole hull could explode in fire. Arlen stood between them, silent, weighing impossible choices. If they waited, they might be discovered. If they rushed the core, they might die before finishing. He looked at his crew and saw the same fire in their eyes that he carried in his own. They were afraid, but fear could not rule them. They had already decided. They would not crawl. They would not beg. If the enemy came, they would fight. Slowly, quietly, the crew began preparing what weapons they had. Old Terran cannons stripped from wrecks were dragged into position. Mines built from fuel cells and shrapnel were hidden in the debris fields. Welding torches became blades, pipes became hammers, and every hand became a soldier's hand. They worked in silence, each motion sharp, each movement urgent. The Dreadnought was not ready, but their spirit was. They would meet the scout if it came, and they would spill its blood into the void. The scrapyard would echo with fire once more. In the darkness outside, the signal grew stronger. The scout was close. Too close. The crew could feel the weight of its sensors brushing against their hull, as if an invisible hand was reaching through the shadows. They held their breath and waited. The graveyard had given them steel. The graveyard had given them fire. Now it was testing them, daring them to stand or be buried. And in that silent moment, as sparks faded cold on the floor, the crew of the Terran ship made a promise. If discovered, they would not run. They would turn the first sparks of their work into fire that would burn the sky. The scout ship did not pass them by. Its pale lights crept closer, moving slowly between the wrecks, scanning, searching. The Terran crew watched in silence, their bodies tense, their breath shallow. Every second felt like a blade pressing against their throats. They had no shields, no engine strong enough to run, and their ship was half dead. If the scout found them, there would be a raise and a burst of fire. The only chance was to stay hidden in the bones of the scrapyard and pray the shadows covered them. But the shadows betrayed them. A spark, tiny but sharp, slipped from one of the still-hot welds and drifted into the void. The scout turned toward it. Alarms whispered inside the Terran ship. The enemy had locked on. The crew scrambled to stations, though none were truly ready. Arlen shouted orders with a voice like iron. They had prepared traps, small bombs hidden in the wrecks, improvised mines made from broken fuel cells. Now was the time to use them. The engineer sent the first signal. A wrecked fighter exploded in the scout's path, throwing out a wave of shrapnel. For a moment, it worked. The scout twisted, shield flaring, but it was not destroyed. It pushed forward, hungry to finish the kill. The crew armed their cannons. Rusted, mismatched, patched together, the guns screamed when they fired, spitting bolts of plasma into the dark. Some shots struck the scout, cutting across its hull, but its armor was strong. It answered with a beam of light that sliced through a broken freighter and sent metal spinning. The Terran ship shuddered as the shockwave passed. Sparks rained inside, wires boned, and one of the gunners fell from his chair. Blood mixed with smoke, but still they fought. They had promised each other no more running. This was their stand. Then, from the shadows, something else moved. Not the scout, not the Terrans. Old machines stirred within the graveyard. Drones, forgotten war tools, woke as if called by the noise of battle. Their eyes glowed red, their frames twisted but still deadly. They had been sleeping for years, maybe decades, hidden in the wrecks like spiders waiting for prey. Now they rose, and they saw everything as prey. The scout fired at them, thinking they were Terran allies, but the drone swarmed it in silence, claws tearing at its armor. Metal screamed against metal. The crew watched in shock as predator turned to prey. Arlen did not waste a chance. He ordered every cannon to fire, not only at the scout but at the drones too. Chaos lit the graveyard. Explosions tore through broken hulls, flames licking across the void. One drone ripped into the side of the Terran ship, cutting a hole through the docking bay. The crew fought it with welding torches, sparks flying as they drove it back. One man was crushed under its claws before they managed to jam a fuel rod into its chest and detonate it. The blast burned the bay, but the drone fell in pieces, glowing and dead. The alien scout was bleeding fire, surrounded by drones clawing at its hull. It tried to run, but the Terrans fired their improvised mines, one after another. Each blast cut deeper until finally the scout cracked open, spilling flame and metal across the stars. The crew cheered, but their voices carried no joy. The drones were still coming. Dozens now, maybe hundreds, awakened by the fight. They moved with cold hunger, no loyalty, no fear. They were not on the side of Terran or alien. They served only the ancient programming left inside their twisted cores, destroy anything that moved. The ship shook as more drones struck, scraping along the hull, trying to cut their way inside. Arlen knew they could not survive a swarm. Their cannons were weak, their armor thin. The only hope lay where the alien core Nera had studied. She had been working in secret, building an adapter to connect it to their failing systems. It was dangerous, unstable, but she swore it could work. Arlen ordered her to try. The ship groaned as a core was connected, lights flickering, system surging to life with alien power. For the first time in weeks, the ship roared. Engines hummed, weapons charged, the hull shook with raw energy. The Dreadnought was not yet born, but its heart had just started to beat. With the new power, their cannons burned brighter, their shields flickered alive, weak but real. They fired into the swarm, tearing drones apart in bursts of fire. The crew fought with a fury they did not know they still carried. Each drone destroyed was one less shadow in the dark. Still, the swarm was endless. Bodies of broken machines floated around them, but more came from the wrecks, crawling out like insects from a nest. The graveyard itself seemed to be alive with death. Arlen shouted for them to push forward, to fight their way deeper into the wreck field, to use the debris as cover. They moved slowly, engines screaming, scraping against broken ships as they fled the worst of the swarm. Drones slammed into their hull, but the shields held just long enough for the crew to cut them apart. At last, they reached a hollow in the graveyard, a cluster of wrecks locked together into a cavern of steel. There they hid, silent once more, their ship battered and smoking, their crew bleeding and exhausted. But they were alive. The scout was gone. The drones were scattered, hunting through the graveyard but not yet finding them. The alien core burned inside the heart of their ship, unstable but strong, filling the hull with strange light. The crew lay on the floor, their chests heaving, their hands shaking, but their eyes bright. They had fought an enemy scout, they had survived the drones, and they had drawn the first blood of their new war. They were still not ready, still fragile, still hunted. But something had changed. They were no longer prey hiding in the dark. They were becoming a weapon. And as the graveyard groaned around them, as shadows still moved in the distance, the Terran crew understood one thing. The forge had been lit, and there was no turning back. The hollow of wrecks became their shelter, but also their prison. The crew sealed the torn holes in the hull and patched what they could, though smoke still hissed from the walls and the taste of metal filled the air. Bodies of broken drones floated outside, drifting like iron corpses, but the swarm was not gone. At any moment, more could return. The crew knew they had only one choice now. If they were to survive the graveyard and the coming fleet, their half-dead ship must become something greater. They had started a dream in whispers. Now that dream would become their only chance. They would forge a dreadnought. The work became endless. Day and night blurred together, broken only by the hum of alien energy flowing through their patched systems. The core Nera had connected kept glowing, sometimes steady, sometimes wild. It gave them power but also fear. The engineers muttered that it might overload, burning them alive from the inside. But without it, the ship was nothing more than drifting scrap. They chose to live with the fire rather than die without it. Each system was rebuilt, every weapon tested, every line of code rewritten. Their ship was no longer a Terran patrol craft. It was becoming something new, something born from desperation and fury. Arlen pushed his crew harder than ever. His voice cut through the exhaustion, sharp and unyielding. He did not allow despair to return. He reminded them of the colonies burned, of the families lost, of the laughter of alien voices when humanity fell. He told them the galaxy believed Terrans were finished, crawling in the dark like broken animals. Each weld, each plate of armor, each cannon mounted was a strike against that lie. The Dreadnought would not only save them. It would scream into the void that humanity still lived, and that humanity would fight. But building such a monster was more than steel. It was blood. The crew bled on the floors as they cut their hands, open dragging beams. They burned their skin in welding sparks, coughed in smoke, fainted from hunger, yet rose again. Supplies ran low. Food was almost gone. Filters strained to clean the air. Tension grew sharp. Some whispered again that it was hopeless, that a smaller ship could carry them away before the fleet came. But Arlen crushed the whispers. Escape was not survival. Escape was only waiting for death later. He would rather die in battle than starve in hiding, and he demanded the same from them. Some hated him for it. Some loved him for it. But all obeyed. Nera worked like fire-possessed. She had become the heart of their forge, guiding the alien core, bending it to Terran systems, finding ways no one else would dare. She spoke to it as if it were alive, as if it understood her. Her eyes glowed with its reflection, and some crew began to fear her. They muttered that she was no longer only Terran, that the core was changing her. But when the cannons powered stronger than ever, when the engines roared for the first time in weeks, their fear turned to respect. Whatever she had done, it worked. The ship was no longer silent. It was breathing. The Dreadnought's frame grew wider, thicker. Alien plating fused with human steel, covering old scars. Cannons were mounted on every side, some heavy, some light, some not meant for any Terran hand, but welded to serve anyway. Inside, corridors twisted where repairs cut across old designs. It was no clean warship of the past. It was a beast stitched from corpses, ugly and raw, but its ugliness was strength. The crew began to call it the Iron Grave, though the name was never spoken loudly. To name it fully would mean it was alive, and some feared that day. As the Dreadnought grew, the graveyard stirred. More drones hunted in the distance. Faint signals whispered on the edge of their scanners. Voice, long-range scans showed the enemy fleet was moving. They would be here soon. A wall of warships, armored and armed, hunting for survivors. Time pressed like a blade. Arlen told them they had only days left. They must finish or die. Fear pressed harder than hunger now. The crew fought against sleep, against weakness. They welded while trembling, bolted cannons while their arms shook. They built faster, louder, risking more sparks and more sound that might draw drones near. Every clang of steel was a gamble, but the alternative was worse. To be caught unready when the fleet arrived would mean death without honor. One night, if nights could exist in space, the Dreadnought groaned like a living thing. The alien core surged, lights flashing through the corridors, engines shaking the hull. For a moment, it seemed the whole ship might tear apart. Nera screamed for everyone to hold steady as she slammed her hands across controls, whispering to the core as if it were a child in pain. Slowly, the power settled. The ship calmed, but not fully. The crew looked at one another with unease. They had built something too wild to tame. But wild or not, it was theirs. Then came the test. Drones had found them again, a swarm creeping through the wrecks, glowing red like angry stars. Arlen ordered the ship to stand. For the first time, the patch cannons fired with full strength. Bolts of fire cut the swarm into pieces, explosions scattering across the dock. Shields flared as drones slammed into them, but the armor held. The Iron Grave roared with power, the crew shouting with it, their voices mixing with the thunder of guns. It was not yet complete, but it was alive enough to kill. They fought until the last drone burned and silence returned. The crew stood in smoke and blood, staring at what they had created. The Dreadnought was still rough, still incomplete, but its heart was real. It had fought. It had won. For the first time since the fall of the Terran fleets, they felt not only survival, but strength. Yet they knew what was coming. The fleet was near. Their time was almost gone. They had forged a monster, but now it must face the true fire. Arlen looked out into the stars and whispered that they were ready. Even if the galaxy sent its strongest, the Iron Grave would answer. The Dreadnought was not finished, but time had run out. Long-range scans confirmed what everyone feared. The enemy fleet was coming. Not one ship, not a scout, but an entire strike group of warships sweeping through the sector, burning everything they touched. The crew stared at the readings in silence. Some clenched their fists, others bowed their heads. The graveyard that had sheltered them was no longer a hiding place. It was about to become a battlefield once again. Captain Arlen told them there was no choice. The Iron Grave would rise now, finished or not. They would fight, or they would be erased. Engines roared as the alien core pulsed brighter than ever, filling the ship with light and trembling power. The patch system screamed under the strain, but they held. The crew strapped themselves to stations, fear sharp in their eyes but steel in their hearts. Arlen stood tall, his voice steady, reminding them that humanity had been broken but not ended. The galaxy thought them dead. Tonight, they would prove otherwise. His words carried through the ship like fire, and even those who doubted felt their hands steady. The Dreadnought was not only a machine now. It was their vengeance, their answer to centuries of mockery. The enemy fleet entered the graveyard with cold precision. Their warships glided like blades, their hulls smooth and bright, weapons glowing with energy. They moved through the wrecks carefully, scanning, hunting, sure of their victory. The Terran crew watched as the sensors painted their numbers. Too many, far too many. Yet there was no turning back. Arlen gave the order. The iron grave powered forward, engines howling, shadows scattering from its patched and jagged hull. For the first time, the galaxy would see what humanity had built from its bones. The first shots came fast. Enemy cannons lit the graveyard in white fire, tearing apart wrecks as they searched for their prey. Arlen ordered the mines released. Old fuel cells wrapped in shrapnel drifted out, hidden in the debris. When the nearest enemy frigate passed through, the mines detonated in a burst of chaos. Armor cracked, shields flared, and the frigate spun in flames. The crew roared, their voices shaking the deck. It was only the beginning, but it was proof. They could hurt them. They could fight. Then the battle exploded. Dozens of ships locked onto the iron grave, beams cutting through the dark. Shields shook. Sparks burst through the corridors. Smoke filled the air. The crew coughed and screamed but held their stations. Cannons answered, firing in all directions. Alien weapons stitched the Terran frames roared, tearing enemy ships apart piece by piece. The Dreadnought moved like a beast in chains, slow but unstoppable, dragging itself through fire and death. Each impact shook its frame, but each strike it returned was heavier, louder, deadlier. The graveyard echoed with thunder. Still, the enemy was strong. Their formation tightened, warships surrounding the Dreadnought, cutting off its path. Plasma fire sliced through its armor, tearing open sections, throwing crew members into the void. Neera screamed as she fought to stabilize the core, her hands dancing across glowing controls, sweat running down her face. The core pulsed wildly, feeding more energy than the systems could bear. If it failed, the ship would die in an instant. But she held it, whispering to it like before, forcing it to obey. The Dreadnought roared again, and cannons answered with fire enough to shatter another enemy frigate. Arlen gave orders like a blade. He told the gunners to target weak points, to strike where the enemy least expected. He told the engineers to overload vents and release bursts of steam to blind sensors. He told pilots to use the wrecks as shields, weaving the Dreadnought through twisted metal as if dragging a mountain through a maze. Every risk was a gamble. Every move could have killed them. Yet the crew obeyed, their fear burned away by the fire of survival. They were not running anymore. They were writing their names in the blood of their enemies. Then the flagship appeared. It loomed above the others, larger, heavier, armed with a cannon so vast it could tear a planet apart. Its arrival silenced the crew for a moment. Even Arlen's voice fell quiet. The flagship locked onto them, its cannon charging with a light brighter than any star. If it fired, there would be nothing left of the iron grave but dust. The crew knew it. Their hands trembled, their eyes filled with terror. But Arlen did not look away. He stared at the screen, his jaw set, and whispered that if they must die, they would die striking. Neera shouted that the core could give them one last surge, a push of power strong enough to do something insane. Arlen did not hesitate. He gave the order. The ship shook as the core screamed, the alien light flooding every corridor, rattling every plate of armor. The iron grave leapt forward, faster than it had ever moved, charging straight at the flagship like a beast breaking its chains. Enemy warships fired desperately, beams slicing across its hull, but it did not stop. Armor melted, decks cracked, fire poured from its wounds, but still it charged. Cannons roared, missiles screamed, debris shattered. The Dreadnought plowed through wrecks, smashing aside drones, tearing into the enemy's ranks. The crew shouted through blood and smoke, their voices roared with fury and defiance. The flagship's cannon reached full power, its barrel glowing with the energy of destruction. But the Iron Grave was already too close, its own cannons firing into its armor, tearing chunks from its frame. The battlefield burned around them, every star drowned in fire and metal. And in that moment, as the flagship prepared to fire, the crew of the Terran Dreadnought knew their trial was not over. It was only beginning. The flagship's cannon burned with light brighter than any star. The Terran crew stared at the growing glow, their hearts sinking, their breath held. That single shot could tear apart a city, a moon, a dreadnought stitched from scrap. The Iron Grave shuddered as its hull split in places, pieces of armor peeling away, flames bursting from vents. Yet still it drove forward. Arlen stood firm, gripping the chair as if his strength alone could hold the ship together. He gave no order to retreat. He knew there was no retreat left. They had built this monster for one purpose, and now that purpose was here. The core screamed. Nera pressed her hands against the controls, sweat dripping into her eyes, her arms shaking as the alien energy surged through the ship. She whispered to it, begged it, demanded it. The lights flickered and pulsed, flooding the corridors with a strange glow, almost alive. The crew around her felt it in their bones, the beat of the core mixing with their own hearts. For the first time, they felt the ship not only as steel and fire, but as something greater, something that carried their spirit. The Iron Grave was no longer a broken machine. It was their will made into metal. The flagship fired. The sky tore open in a beam of white fire. It struck the Dreadnought shields, ripping them apart in a burst of sparks, burning through its armor, throwing the crew from their seats. The hull bent, corridors collapsed, and flames raced down the walls. Men and women screamed as metal tore, but the ship did not fall. The Iron Grave took the shot and lived. Smoke poured from its wounds, but the core burned brighter, refusing to die. The crew dragged themselves back to stations, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Arlen roared that they were not finished, not yet. Cannons answered with fury. Every weapon they had screamed, alien and Terran alike, firing into the flagship at once. Beams carved into its armor. Missiles tore holes through its decks. Drones hacked from the graveyard were unleashed against its shields. The Iron Grave rammed forward, its jagged frame smashing into enemy hulls as it cut its way through the fleet. The crew shouted with it, their voices rising like a storm. They had no elegance, no perfect design, only raw rage hammered into steel. The flagship shook under their fire, its cannon recharging too slowly to answer in time. The enemy fleet tried to protect their leader, swarming around the Dreadnought, but the Iron Grave fought like a beast chained too long. Every plate of armor, every stolen cannon, every ugly world worked now as if destiny had shaped it. The crew fought like demons, gunners screaming, engineers patching leaks with bare hands, pilots weaving through wrecks. Fear was gone. All that remained was a fire of survival, burning brighter than the void itself. One by one, enemy ships fell, their hulls torn open, their lights dying as a dreadnought crushed them in its path. The flagship began to break. Its proud armor cracked, flames pouring from its wounds. Its cannon flickered, unable to charge again. Arlen saw the chance. He ordered the final strike. Nera forced the alien core into overdrive, her body shaking, her voice hoarse as she shouted to hold it steady. The ship roared louder than ever, its engines screaming, its weapons glowing with power they were never meant to carry. The Iron Grave surged forward and slammed into the flagship with all the strength of a dying world. Cannons fired point-blank, tearing through decks, splitting its spine. The flagship shuddered, twisted, and finally exploded, a storm of fire ripping across the battlefield. Silence followed. The enemy fleet faltered. Some ships fled, others burned. The Terran Dreadnought drifted in the ruins, its hull torn, its systems failing, but still alive. The crew sat in the smoke-filled bridge, their bodies broken, their faces smeared with blood and ash, but their eyes bright. They had done the impossible. A crew of survivors, armed with nothing but scrap, had torn down a flagship and broken a fleet. The galaxy had called them finished. Now the galaxy would whisper their name with fear. Arlen stood, though his legs trembled, and looked at his crew. He told them this was not the end. Humanity was not gone. As long as one ship fought, as long as one crew refused to surrender, the Terran still lived. He raised his hand, and the others followed, weak but steady. In that ruined bridge, among sparks and smoke, a vow was made. They would carry this fight beyond the graveyard. They would rise from the ashes and remind the stars that humans were not prey. Humans were the storm. The iron grave drifted forward, scarred but unbroken, its jagged hull glowing with the fire of victory. Around it floated the wrecks of enemies far stronger than they were supposed to be. The Dreadnought had been born in darkness, shaped by death, forged by the hands of the desperate. It was ugly, heavy, and wrong by every rule of design. Yet it was the most beautiful thing the crew had ever seen, because it was theirs. It was proof that even broken steel could rise again, that even shattered people could become a weapon. Humanity had been mocked as weak, but in the silence after the battle, the galaxy had learned the truth. From scrap, from ruin, from the bones of the dead, the Terrans had built a Dreadnought.